Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. So let's talk about all of my 1 and 2 stars for the year. I already did a 5-star video, so if you are interested in knowing all of the books that I gave 5 stars, you can check that video out. So we will start with my 1 stars, and it really hasn't been that many. I don't tend to give 1 stars unless the book is just something that I don't feel like anybody should ever read. Usually if I just don't like it, I'll give it 2 stars, and then the 1 star is like, don't ever read this. It shouldn't exist kind of situation. So the first book, I guess is technically a manga series that I gave 1 star was Ouran High School Host Club, volumes 1 through 3. I gave them 1 stars. This is a very old and very beloved manga series and anime that a lot of people grew up reading or watching. And I did not. So I had like none of the nostalgic feeling while reading this, and it was extremely uncomfortable. There was a lot of like incest, some not great comments, just a lot of content in there that just was uncomfortable and that I wasn't a fan of. It doesn't hold up. So I wouldn't recommend reading it now or watching the anime, to be honest, but I understand the people that love it, who have like that nostalgia feeling connected to it. So another 1 star that I gave this year was Midnight Sun, which is the 5th book in the Twilight series. It is Twilight from Edward's point of view. I grew up reading Twilight, watching Twilight. I have loved Twilight for a really long time. Obviously, I don't love Stephenie Meyer, and I understand all of the problems with the Twilight series, and they kind of just hold a nostalgic value to me. I mean, I have them right here, but they're not a book series that I would ever recommend or think are like the epitome of what literature are. They are just books that have a special meaning to me as they got me into reading. They were my cornerstone for a lot of my friendships growing up, and like my reading experience. But I understood how nostalgia doesn't excuse anything. Nostalgia is not a good enough reason to support an author or anything like that. So I went in kind of already knowing that I didn't support anything that was going on. But I also went in hoping that Stephenie Meyer had learned from her mistakes with the trilogy, 4 books? With the series, with the Twilight series, and that things had changed and she had kind of made amends with the things that she did, especially to the indigenous tribes that she affected with her series, and none of that happened. And I think this was a useless waste of money grab book. Edward was completely insufferable, misogynistic. He was horribly boring, very self-righteous, and it was literally scene by scene the Twilight book, but dragged out into like 600 pages. And he was just a horribly annoying person to listen to. He thought everyone was vapid and self-centered. He made Bella more interesting, which she's like a brick, so that's kind of shocking. But altogether, it just was an awful experience. It was too long, and there was no reason for it. Like, and then the last book that I gave 1 star was R.I.P. I have a whole dedicated reading vlog to this. Go in with extreme caution. This is a very awful book. It's considered like horror erotica, and if you think this is erotic,
disgusting!
It has incest, marital rape, it has rape between a son and a mother, brutal torture, blood play, murder, but mostly a lot of like incest between a brother and a sister. That's like 90% of it, and that's what it's like romanticizing. It's honestly one of the most disgusting pieces of work that I've ever read in my entire life, period. Like, it's awful. One of the 2 stars that I gave this year was A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. This is another book that I have a dedicated reading vlog to. This is the 2nd book in the From Blood and Ash series, and every problem that I had with the first one was just exacerbated in this one. I felt like the world building just never stopped. and we never got actual plot. And the world building was completely irrelevant, and the ending was genuinely annoying. I felt like I knew what the author was trying to do with the 800 pages of world building, and then we got to the ending and I was like, okay, so what did you really do it for? Because you just ruined all of it. And it was horribly disappointing. If you went into From Blood and Ash and had problems with the world building, anything like that, don't read this, because it's just going to exacerbate any of the issues that you had with From Blood and Ash. And I honestly let the hype really get to me, because some of the key people in the romance community were saying it was so good, like the best, fantasy romance that they've read in a long time, and it just was not that at all for me. Then gave The Inheritance Games 2 stars. This is like a YA mystery that was just horribly boring. Girl who gets a letter saying that she has been left like an inheritance, but she has to go to the family estate and solve this puzzle to get the inheritance. And the entire story is her flirting with people that she might thinks might be her brothers, and then like not really, but kind of trying to solve this puzzle with a clue like every 50 pages, and then nothing else happening. Her talking about the money and the paparazzi. That's it. It's horribly boring, and honestly the ending just like pissed me off. So very disappointing. So next up, I gave The Scale 2 stars as well. This is about this woman who goes to a vineyard for her best friend's wedding, and she has a romance with the vineyard owner, but she spends the entire time pining after her best friend. My largest issue with this was that the heroine spends the entirety of the book complaining about how she looks, like begging people for compliments, telling herself that no one could ever want her, and why does this guy want her? It must be a trick, and just dogging herself the entire time. And then the very end of the book, the central conflict was so out of character for this heroine that I had to give it 2 stars. Like I couldn't give it any other rating because it made no freaking sense. Like it made me angry. I read this whole book of her shitting on herself only for her to do this thing that makes no sense. And then the book ends and they have a kid together in like 2 weeks after they met each other. It just very, very irritating. There's like lots of unprotected sex in here just for the hell of it, and no. Next up, I gave Wicked Saints 2 stars. So prior to all of these stuff coming out about Duncan, the author, like her bullying and the anti-Semitism and all of that, I had done a reread of the Wicked Saints series the first one in preparation to read the second one. And it was just as bad the second time as it was the first time. And the second one was a DNF. It was horrid. Obviously, I don't support anything to do with this author, and her books are bad. The world building is awful. For a fantasy, there is like zero description. It's hard to understand the plot or the history of this world or like picture anything. The characters are horribly bland. One point of view is just completely irrelevant. And like the one good thing that she had going for her, she absolutely butchers in the second book. So awful 2 stars. So then I also gave Dark Fever 2 stars. I honestly couldn't tell you a single detail about this. I just know Dark Alley's vampires, I think. I don't know. I also unfortunately gave All Scott and Bothered 2 stars. This book rubbed me the wrong way to the max. I really strongly disliked the hero. So this is basically about a woman who why can't I talk today? Inherits a gambling den, and he is a Bow Street runner, which is like a PI or a cop, and he suspects that she's running a human trafficking ring, and he like investigates, and then they do an investigation together. I could not stand the hero. He was so self-righteous the entire time. He degraded her as a person the entire time. He was just, I did not like him, and it ruined the entire book for me. I like the heroine and I like the plot. He just ruined all of it. And then halfway through, it got so boring, like so boring. I couldn't stand it. I gave 8 Perfect Murders 2 stars as well. Horribly boring. So you'll notice a trend. A lot of these are just boring books. Like this is about a guy who is approached by the FBI because he wrote a list on his blog of like the 8 perfect ways to conduct a murder based on literature. And then someone is murdering people using his list. And so they recruit him to investigate with them. They think it might be him. Predictable, boring, writing was bad, just not a good thriller. I then gave 2 stars to Shipped, which is a vacation-y, on honeymooners-esque romance about enemies to lovers, office romance, and the heroine was absolutely insufferable. They basically go on this cruise together. They both are up for a promotion, and their boss tells them whoever like sells the cruise well enough will get the promotion. And the heroine, awful, like so awful. The writing was fine, like the descriptions about where they were and all of that were fine, but she just ruined the whole thing for me and just, ugh. I gave 2 stars to Voyeur. I'm kind of sad about this, but this is about a woman who she works at a voyeur club, which is basically where you can go as like a customer to watch 2 employees of the club fulfill like whatever sexual fantasy, but you can't touch them or anything like that. You can just watch. And the hero sees her working there and like falls in love with her. He has like a lot of touch sensitivity and things like that. And it started off fantastic. And then once they actually got together, the most glaring issue for me was that he had a massive jealousy issue. He had a massive issue with the fact that she was a sex worker, and you met her in a sex club. You met her on the job. Like, you fell in love with her on the job. You knew this was her job. So the fact that you're gonna shame her and have jealousy over her job and show up at her job and get mad is incredibly disgusting to me. And I hated it. Like, it ruined the whole thing. So next I gave Sugar Daddies 2 stars. This was a Sugar Daddies romance. 2 guys are trying to introduce a third woman into their relationship, so they kind of hire her and like they're her sugar daddies. This was good, again, for like half of it. I will say that the language used in the sex scenes is fine, but the actual dialogue used, awful. And then like halfway through, it just became so weird, like the drama with the heroine and her like at work. Like, one of the guys was her boss, but she had like her stepsister there. Like, she felt very childish. Like, the character that she was when she was with the guys was very different than the character that she was every other time, and it just felt very disjointed. And also, the actual like reasoning for the relationship was kind of gross and uncomfortable, and altogether it just became kind of awful at the end.
Okay, so I don't feel like I fully explained why I felt, not a spoiler, because there is a spoiler for why I didn't like this, but to not spoil things, there is a certain part of this that I said is the reason for why they are employing someone to be like an extra in their relationship. And I think that in order to fulfill the reason and to keep their relationship going, the heroine had to lose a part of herself. And one of my biggest pet peeves in stories in general is when I feel like a character has lost a sense of agency or they've given up part of themselves.
All right, a couple more 2 stars. So next up, I gave Star Daughter 2 stars. This is a Hindu-inspired fantasy about a girl who's half star, and in order to save her father, she has to go up into the stars and compete in this competition. The world building didn't make sense to me personally because a lot of like Hindu-related animals and people and like mythos is used, and because I listened to the audiobook for this, I didn't have like a glossary, so my understanding of the actual world was a little hazy. In addition to that, The teenagers in this were written very young. I think this is like young adult. Very, very annoying. Their decision-making skills were terrible. And it just was kind of boring. The competition element was very lacking, and like the betrayals and things in the series or in the book just were weird, and it wrapped up in a neat little bow, and it just, I don't know. I didn't like it. The last two that I have given 2 stars recently is Every Value Break and The Cabin at the End of the World. So, The Cabin at the End of the World is kind of like a Strangers-esque book. They are taking a vacation. 2 dads and their daughter are taking a vacation in this cabin, and these group of strangers show up, tie them to chairs, and say, you have to sacrifice one of yourselves or something bad is going to happen. And then Every Value Break is about this woman who, in her bachelor party, cheats on her husband with this guy, and then her and her husband go on a honeymoon to a remote island, and the guy that she cheated on her husband with shows up at the island, and they were both honestly really bad. I enjoyed Every Value Break, but the more I thought about it, the less good it was towards the end. I actually have a video for these, like the last 3 2 stars that I've talked about. If you want to check that out, it's my reading the lowest rated books on my TBR, where I go super in depth for all of these books on why I had issues with them. But yeah, those 2 are just, they're not it. Those are all of the books that I have given 1 or 2 stars so far. This is not including my DNFs or anything like that, because I don't rate those. But comment down below your thoughts on any of the books that I talked about, or any of the books that you've given 1 or 2 stars. I would love to know. Other than that, I will catch you guys in my next video. Thanks so much for watching.